crime is a most unusual beast because crime itself is based on a very old principle in law known as malum in se. When malum in se becomes malum prohibita, when something is so wrong in and of itself, we prohibit it. So in a way, society gets to a stage and it says, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this. So we create the law of theft, for instance, or burglary, and so on and so forth. So here we have a missing law, if you like. And what we do know from the records, and we do have the minutes of that meeting, but also we have the opinions of the special rapporteurs of the time. So this is not my opinion, but the opinion then, is that it was known that 4 countries had lobbied against this becoming an international crime. No guesses. So the US, the UK, the Netherlands and France, yeah. And there were 1 or 2 other countries that possibly were involved as well. But they were the 4 main countries. And the problem was that this was clearly corporate lobbying. Not my opinion, the opinion of the UN rapporteurs at the time. And we're looking at oil, mainly. But also, 1996 was a very important year for a number of reasons. It was the year that GM first came on, genetic modification, first came on the supermarket shelves in America. It was recognised that this would have potential consequences for terminator seeds for the GM industry at large. Because the test, of course, is whether or not it's causing significant harm. Fracking as well. Fracking went big in 1996 in America and Canada. And unconventional tar extraction. That was the year that 3 other sites were identified throughout the world for creating a new Athabasca tar sands. So this was recognised to come from those industries lobbying. What that made me realise is how important a law like this must stay in the public domain. If it remains behind closed doors once again, nothing will happen. In fact, the same will happen once again. And the beauty is, unlike in 1996, we are in a very different place. We do have a far more availability to open sourcing information. Everything on the Eradicating Ecocide website is under Creative Commons. Everything that I do is open sourced. And I'm very clear about that. Filming as well, I invite those who film me to open source the filming so that it carries the message forward as well. So this is really about taking something that has huge potential consequences for humanity at large to really start shifting what we're seeing as a ship that's going off in a direction, a trajectory of mass damage and destruction, and turns around very fast. Because this is also about the flow of money. Of course, money flows into that which gives us greatest profit. But by creating an international law of ecocide, what happens here is that your number 1 overriding duty is to ensure that first do no harm. The first do no harm principle. And by doing that, and having a test there, whether or not a business is going to cause significant harm, means that investors will suddenly see it as very high risk. In fact, what you're doing is you're creating a consequence analysis rather than just a risk analysis. You're looking to the consequences to say whether or not investment should go into a certain industry and industrial practices that are deemed dangerous and will become illegal. So this is really about how we shift the flow of money and trigger the green economy in a very big way. It also creates a level playing field right across the world. And by doing that, by creating literally the enforcement mechanism for a legal duty of care, over and above that which drives companies forward, their number 1 decision-making process in a boardroom is, well, first and foremost, is this going to cause significant harm? If so, we cannot go there. In fact, we're not going to get the finance for it, and that government's not going to support it with its policy. So this is a law, really, that can address many, many issues right across the board. It's very much about intergenerational equity. What we choose to do here and now, today, in our lifetimes, that will have huge ripple effects across the annals of time. And I'm looking 2,000 years hence. So what we decide to do now in the 21st century can have huge implications for future generations. And that's hugely important here, because this really is about how we change the state of the world today and create what my friend Charles Eisenstein talks about, a more beautiful world that our heart knows is possible. So for me, this is not about finger pointing, it's not about saying, okay, you are the ecocidal criminals. In fact, I'm very pro-business. What I'm doing is I'm proposing an international legislative framework that makes the problem into the solution. And it's about turning dirty energy into clean energy, because we are going to need to scale it up. And the thing is, this is about creating jobs, it's about creating resilience within our economies. So this is really an opportunity to take something like a law of ecocide and also bring to the table a very different kind of conversation. Rather than it being a blame game, it's about, in fact, inviting everyone to the table and saying nobody comes to the table with clean hands. Not one country, not one business. I'm sure many of you have seen the Carbon Majors report that came out last year. And it looks at the top, in fact it identifies 68 of the world's largest corporations that are contributing 60% of human-made greenhouse gas emissions. Now those 68 corporations are some of the biggest corporations in the world involved in heavy extractive industry and energy. And of course all of that is ecocide. So this is really about turning our businesses around and creating the enabling conditions so that it can be done, creating a level playing field, but also allowing assistance to come forward to allow that, facilitate that change to turn around. Now, often people say to me, this is just not possible, we're so far down this route, how could we ever turn this juggernaut around? You know, so many businesses are so powerful, they make so much money out of this. How could we possibly do this? Well, here's the thing. We've done it before, and we can do it again. And I'd like to give you an example of a time when we did it before. And it was really a very powerful example, because at that time, it was said it could never be done. And that was the abolition of slavery. Now, slavery was something that really financed the world in a big way, and not just slavery, the secondary industries that came out of slavery. So sugar plantations, the first monocrop plantations that we ever had, were heavily driven by the use of slaves, heavily dependent on it. Now, William Wilberforce was one of the main spokespersons for the abolition of slavery here in Britain. And it wasn't just him. It was really triggered by the Quakers standing up and speaking out, but it needed a powerful voice to stand up and really tackle this issue, and many others did as well. But William Wilberforce was very interesting for me when I researched my first book and I looked into how he addressed this. And what I discovered was he recognised three key things had to happen. First of all, we had to get rid of the subsidies that propped up slavery. Slavery was very heavily subsidised. Secondly, outlaw it. Create the mechanism that criminalises it. Make it illegal. And thirdly, create subsidies and give help to allow those industries to go in a different direction. So he understood very well it wasn't about allowing industry to collapse. And what was so interesting was that, in part, this was born of conversations he had with a man who was possibly the most powerful individual in the business world at that time. He was kind of like, Mr. ExxonMobil of his day. And his name was Charles Grant. He was one of the directors of the British East India Company. Now, Charles Grant and William Wilberforce met in a secret location, in a house, actually, that I've been in here in London, which is now owned by one of our climate scientists. And they would meet there to talk about this. And the thing was, Charles Grant really got it. He really got the moral imperative. He understood that slavery must stop. It doesn't work to commoditize humanity by dint of the colour. Just because you are black, to put you in chains and buy and sell you and use you and abuse you, commoditize you, treat you as a piece of property and own you. And he recognized this does not work. Does not work for humanity. And Charles Grant and William Wilberforce had long conversations about this. And William Wilberforce encouraged Charles Grant to speak out. Now, here was a man who stood to lose everything: his status, his job, his company, everything that he was making money out of. But he did. Charles Grant did stand up and speak out. Now, the interesting thing is that often CEOs and directors of companies are greatly feted in their lifetimes, but often are forgotten in the annals of history. They're very quickly gone from our radar, our history, of our memory of how the world works. And Charles Grant has really become a kind of byline in the annals of history. But what he did was truly remarkable for a number of reasons. Because actually when he stood up and he spoke out, he stepped out of his own comfort zone in a very big way. Here he was standing up and he was speaking out against something that was against his own corporate interests. But he did it from a position of altruism and recognition that it could no longer continue. And when he did that, something amazing happened. Business started to respond. Other people within business started standing up and saying, yeah, you're right. He gave them, in effect, permission to say the unthinkable. And government also listened as well, because they were starting to hear it from business. So this is the powerful thing, because we all act like a lighthouse when we stand up and we speak out about that which we see as being wrong. We actually give permission to each other to stand up and speak out as well. And we can be very powerful bridges into whatever our sphere of influence is. Because of course it wasn't just William Wilberforce in the political world, it wasn't just Charles Grant in the business world. It was also the many, many people who stood up and spoke out as voices on behalf of the slaves. People would literally get on their horses and ride from town to town to town and stand up and speak out about how wrong this was. Josiah Wedgwood, he made teapots with the imagery of a black man in chains saying, I am a human being. Amazing, so that when you're pouring your cup of tea, you could actually show what you supported. You supported the abolition of slavery. It's very, very powerful. So this is really, I think, very important, because we can learn the lessons from history. And you know, William Wilberforce, when he first stood up and spoke out, everyone said, you're mad. It's impossible. It can never happen. It will lead to economic collapse. But it didn't lead to economic collapse. It wasn't impossible. And William Wilberforce did die a happy man. 2 days before he died, they passed the last of the laws that rippled right across, not just Europe, but the whole world, that brought the abolition of slavery. And not just that, it had a knock-on impact. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, not just white man's rights. And not only that, we have race discrimination laws. So I'm a barrister, and my starting point was 8-9 years ago when I was sitting in court in the Royal Courts of Justice, just virtually next door from where we are today. And I found myself on the very last day of a case that had been running for 3 years. I was in the Court of Appeal, and we were waiting for judgment. I had been representing a man who'd been very badly injured and harmed, both psychologically and physically, in the workplace. And I found myself looking out of the window and thinking, it's not just my client that's been badly injured and harmed, so has the earth. And my next thought actually changed my life. I found myself thinking, the earth is in need of a good lawyer. And all my friends said to me, Polly, you're mad. The idea that the earth has rights too, the right to life, just like a human being, the idea that you can create a fiduciary duty of care for the earth and for all who live here. When I say the earth, I mean people and planet. But you know, all my legal friends now say, I wish I'm doing what you're doing. And I say, great, so come on board. And in fact, there's a whole international network now of, in fact, it's known as the Global Alliance of Earth Lawyers, right across the world of lawyers who are engaging in this in a very big way. Both earth rights and the governance of the earth rights through ecocide and the emergence of a whole new body of law. So today we're going to hear about various aspects, this evening rather, about various aspects and issues that actually all tap in a way, to the ecocides that are playing out within our lifetimes. And we're going to have an opportunity to dig a little deeper, a period of, a deeper inquiry, as Arnie Ness, I've just stepped down from being the Arnie Ness professor at Oslo University, and Arnie Ness talked about how we can think dutifully and to act beautifully. Because if we work from a place of duty, that which comes from it can only be beauty. Thank you very much. Now, in fact, let me invite up the first speaker. We have Bruce Kent. Bruce, are you?